This is my first week of wearing progressive lenses. Figure we teach a progressive Christianity here. I'm going to have to start wearing progressive clothes as well. So last week, I introduced a new word into the lexicon of spiritual language, a word that I am convinced is destined to shape the history of this planet. Although I admit that you people broke out in laughter last week when I introduced it. But I will not be dissuaded. This may be my one shot at spiritual fame, or infamy, as the case may be. One smart aleck in the congregation last week thought, when I used this word, the word it's a conjunction between two words, being and evolutionary. So, bevolutionary. Don't laugh. One smart aleck thought that I said beaver evolutionary and took it to mean a Canadian who believed in evolution. Again, I will stay the course. I am persuaded that this word was channeled directly from intermediary beings of light. Either that or I'm spending way too much time thinking. So, all kidding aside, I'm convinced that this word captures what I believe will represent an authentic spirituality for the 21st century. A practice that is grounded in both the mystical traditions of all of our religious traditions and in modern science. And so, for those of you who weren't here last Sunday, I preached the first part of the sermon and promised that I'd finish it off this weekend. So I need to bring those of you who weren't here up to speed on what I mean by evolutionary. We were considering what Jesus meant by the metaphor of the kingdom of God, that you couldn't understand what Jesus was about unless you had some kind of understanding of this metaphor of the kingdom of God, because he proclaimed it constantly, and this is what he was about in his life. And I suggested that what he means by it, at least this is how I've come to understand it, is that we are intended to have a direct and immediate personal experience of the sacred, of the holy. That it doesn't need to be mediated by priests or ministers or by institutions like temples and churches. It is available to all, this experience of the holy or God. So when Jesus said you need to enter the kingdom of God, this is what he was saying. You need to experience God for yourself. This is the basis of the religious life. It's not the institution, it's not the church. It's this experience of the holy. And historically, mystics have tried to describe their experience of being one with God, and they weren't real popular with the authorities, especially the Christian church, because the church thought that this was their exclusive domain. Controlling access to God gave the powers that be a fair bit of leverage. So they reserved the experience of this experience of unity with God for one human being alone in the whole universe has ever had it, is what they said for centuries. And that was Jesus of Nazareth. And then they controlled access to Jesus of Nazareth. It was interesting. That meant that genuine mystics were forced to tap dance around the priests and the bishops and say, yes, we believe that Jesus is the only Son of God and he was the only one to have a direct and immediate experience of God. And no, I'm not saying that I am one with God. And so there was all this tap dancing that went on. But, and it's a big but, they had actually experienced unity with the holy. And they experienced it through that part of them that was eternal and unchanging. The deepest part of their own being participated directly in God's being, and they didn't know what to make of it, but they knew at that point that they were one with God. And so through various spiritual practices, mostly by observing all the thoughts and feelings and desires that arose in their consciousness, and deciding that they weren't those things, but rather the consciousness itself. They were the being, the pure awareness into which all those thoughts and desires and feelings arose. And that being, that deepest part And they learn to identify with not the things, but the awareness of the things. So here's a simple illustration that will help you with what the heck I'm talking about here. I was in my hot yoga class this past week, and I wasn't looking forward to spending an hour and a half in a 115-degree room. And very early in the class, I was having thoughts like, I hate this teacher. She's stupid. She's making us hold the postures for too long. In fact, I hate this yoga. I've been doing it for 3 years, and I'm not making any improvement at all. And at this point, I had just enough awareness to realize that absolutely none of these thoughts were true. So I just started getting curious about the thoughts. I began to notice them as they came up in my consciousness, and I watched them as they came and they went. And then I just returned to my practice and found stillness in my practice. And at that point, the room, I wouldn't have judged the room as being intolerably hot. I wouldn't judge my yoga as being easy or hard. It just was. I was just there doing my yoga, being. I wasn't the thoughts I was having about my yoga. I was the yoga. And this is what Eckhart Tolle is talking about in his books like The Power of Now. It's being with that part of us that's eternally present and that is eternal and unchanging. And it's one way not only to connect with ultimate reality, or what we call God, but to experience union with that ever-present, absolute, formless awareness from which all experience arises. And when a person achieves this on a permanent basis in waking consciousness, in sleeping, and even in dream consciousness, which people do, we call them enlightened beings. And so this is one side of the equation of experiencing God. This is the being side. But it's not all just about being, is it, this human life we've been given? We've all heard the famous New Age mantra, be here now. And that's important. It's what I've been talking about for the last few minutes. But as Andrew Cohen points out in a recent article, this mantra needs to be supplemented by another mantra, which is do here now. Do here now. We need to understand what it is we're doing from a sacred perspective. But it's not just about being. And again, there are mystics like Jesus in the Jewish tradition, and Hafiz and Rumi in the Sufi tradition of Islam, that intuited what we are doing when we are not simply being. And science has confirmed their intuition. We are evolving, along with the rest of the universe. That's what we're doing. From the great radiance 14 billion years ago to the emergence of self-conscious awareness in human beings, we're developing, we're growing. We're meant to grow. And the distinctive thing about human beings is that we can do this consciously. We have the capacity to consciously evolve. And so when the universe arrived, when biological evolution arrived at the human being, everything shifted from natural selection to actual selection. You and I have the capacity to actually choose our future.